The New York Knicks have traded for Mikal Bridges. They've done a deal with the Nets for the first time since 1983. That's been a long time coming, but this is a great move for the New York Knicks. And as you can see, I'm rocking my Knicks colors because I'm just a really happy guy right now. We have made a move. The superstar that we so-called needed and wanted was not there, and we went and got the absolute next best thing. So I mean, Knicks, great move. Another great move from this Knicks front office.
Dude, how do you even go to sleep? How does New York even sleep after a trade like that? I'm not even in Knicks Nation, and I'm still shocked about it. I mean, just so happy for so many reasons the way this went down. I think first and foremost, maybe I missed all the noise about it entirely, but this was pretty unexpected. This is pretty unexpected. I did not hear any grumblings about it. This kind of happened in silence through the shadows. Did you hear anything about it in advance? Because I definitely am caught by surprise on this.
It was definitely more. There was like the Nets were still trying to push the agenda that they were going to build around Mikal Bridges. That was still kind of the main agenda that was being pushed. But just the fact that it kind of kept on coming out that they had to make that point kind of made you feel like there's a chance they were going to
He's
do
just upping
something.
his price, yeah.
Yeah, there's just a chance they were looking to make a move, and it's the right move for them to make. They need to accept it and go into to rebuild mode. And to the Knicks is obviously the surprise. The fact they're not going to want to do their cross city neighbors any favors. So that is probably why we had to pay that little bit extra. We had to make sure they couldn't say no. But in terms of what we're getting, I'm not too worried about giving up the capital that we gave up because at the end of the day, the Knicks needed to add a star that was 30 years or younger and predominantly healthy. Their options there really any sort of semi-realism to them were Giannis, Devin Booker, and Embiid. None of those deals are happening.
No, yeah,
So
yeah.
they had to go out and do what they could to get the next best thing. And I think Bridges absolutely fits that mold.
Yeah, and actually, you mentioned that really well. I didn't even think about that, but in terms of what he brings to the table, and there's so much to talk about on that, but his sturdiness, 82 games this season, and I got to do math here. He played 56 games with Phoenix, 27 with Brooklyn. That is 70, 80. That's over 82. Um, 83 games season for that, 82 games season for that, 72 only missed 10 games season for that, 73 only missed 9 for that. His rookie season, all 82 games. I'm not a math wizard, but that's well over 95% of his games played
I
in
think
his
he's got the
career.
longest active streak. I could be wrong on that, but I think
I
he's got the
believe so.
longest
I
active
believe
streak
so.
in the league.
Since 2021, essentially hasn't missed a game.
Now, Tibbs would definitely push the limits of that. We're all
Yeah,
very well aware of that, but
but what that brings, that is probably the most important piece of all the teams that have a chance to contend is, are their guys healthy? And this is a guy who clearly stays healthy. But let's talk about the trade. Let's talk about the picks. You mentioned it there. So, I mean, essentially, the Knicks have just mortgaged their future, will not have their own first round pick until 2031. And this isn't
no,
just
no, we still got picks in
their own pick, their
yeah, they
own
have their
pick,
own pick in 2026. 2026. Obviously, they have their two this year.
alternating.
They have their two this year, and then
Yeah.
2026 is good. So they gave up their unprotected picks in 25, 27, 29, and 31.
So they still have, okay, they still
So
have their own picks every other year.
yeah.
Okay. But swaps, I'm pretty sure those are
Yeah, sorry,
swaps.
2028, they don't. That's an unprotected pick swap in 2028, which I'd be surprised. Hopefully the Nets actually have a better pick than us then. That'll be the goal still. But yeah, so I think 2030, 2026, I think we still have our picks there.
Yeah. We've essentially made a window here for the next 4 years. So through 2028, 2029, the Knicks realistically competing for a championship. And I think all things considered, doesn't matter the cost. I don't see anybody complaining about the cost. I don't see how you can, honestly. And I think everyone's had a pretty candid view of it that this is a team that's knocking on the door. that despite all the bumps and bruises along the way, still almost made it to the Eastern Conference Finals with a banged up roster, and you just added the perfect piece. I don't even think there's a conversation about this being an overpay or anything like that. I haven't heard it. I haven't thought it. I don't think anyone's really thinking it.
The negative, there always has to be the negative Nellies out there. They're gonna be like, oh, you overpaid, like people trying to compare it to the Rudy Gobert trade, and things like that. But I think in terms of fit, yeah, I get it. He's never been an all-star. So how could you give up so much draft capital for a guy who's never been an all-star? But he's just such a perfect fit for what this team needs. He's not going to take anything away from Jalen Brunson. He's going into a situation where he could really thrive. And in terms of getting that fit is so hard to find. And especially if for some reason we can't re-sign OG, we can't strike a deal with OG Anunoby, which I still think they're able to do. They can afford to
Yeah.
do as long as OG wants to come back. That definitely, a guy like Bridges softens that blow if for some reason that OG decided to go somewhere else.
Yeah. I can't possibly see OG not signing, first of all, because just team wise, this is his best opportunity to compete for a championship.
Mhm.
Like maybe he could see that opportunity with the 76ers. But I don't think it's relatively close now. And money wise, he's going to get the same amount from any other team.
Yeah.
Any other team. The Knicks will be able to pay him whatever anybody is going to offer him. And I think that the OG conversation will have to come as free agency plows along. I hope for your guys' sake that this kind of gets done within the next few days. Um, but the way that we have to look at this is just through the lens of how this completed the team. And I think what one clear conversation that has to occur as well is what player you're getting. Is this Mikal Bridges of the 23 games you saw him, 27 games you saw him with Brooklyn, or is this the 82 game sample size we saw with him in Brooklyn this year? And honestly, I think it's neither of them. It's neither of them. Like I would argue you hope that he has elevated his game when he was with the Suns, but he's not going to have to be a guy that you give the ball to so much because Brunson is there. Brunson is the focal part of this offense, and Michaela gets to slide back into that secondary, tertiary creator. And from that regard, I mean, his efficiency has to go up. I mean, look at his numbers this season: 19.6 points per game and 3.6 assists to 2 turnovers. Like, not a prolific playmaker there. And his efficiency dipped a little bit from 53% from the field to 49%. And the 3-point shooting, though, has been pretty much constant on high volume, 37% on high volume. A lot of those difficult shots, too. So I think
Mhm.
his perimeter play is something that we can continue to see thrive. And to have, dude, to have him and OG Anunoby on the wing, on the let's just stick offensive end, like that's insane.
Mhm.
That's insane. That's 2K stuff. Like I've drafted 2K teams with these two because they're perfect floor spacers. You don't need to they don't need to touch the ball too often for them to get going. They can pick and choose their spots. But yeah, just let's talk about the offense real quick. How do you envision this expanding what we've already seen from a surprisingly at first, but now not so surprising elite offensive squad?
I mean, I'm picturing we're getting a Mikal Bridges that's going to be like the perfect blend between that initial stint in Brooklyn and like the last year in Phoenix. So he's not going to get as many shots. He's not going to have as high a usage in New York, but I think that could favor him as well. I think the fact that so much attention is going to go on Jalen Brunson, he's going to get more opportunities for open threes, for catch and shoot threes, and that's going to see his
Yep.
percentage rise up. And just the fact that he's got that ability, like to have to bring in a guy that can be a 20 point per game scorer, but also shoot 40% from three. I think that's such a big plus for this Knicks team because as much as we have some good shooters, like Brunson shot 40% from three last year, Dante was huge from three, and Hart had his flurries. Like this is a guy that I really think is that consistent shooter that every team would want, that has the length that makes it tough for guys to block his shot. And I think the obviously just that Villanova connection. I think we're gonna see that right out there on the floor, and it's gonna be just as good. I see the floor of this offense being just as good as it was last year, and
Yeah.
it could absolutely improve.
Yeah, the improvement I think will come from what different lineups they throw out there. DiVincenzo was top 3 shooter
Yeah.
last year, which is like I think people, and myself included, taking a step back and looking at the numbers and looking at the stats out there to realize that Dante DiVincenzo is a top 3, top 5 shooter in this league, and then you add OG, then you add Mikal here. That's that starts to break defenses down in a serious way, especially when you're not replacing Josh Hart's minutes. I think that you switch things up, but you get less lineups where you have 2 non-shooters out there.
Mhm.
And that really starts to break defenses down when you can't send doubles to help on Brunson. You can't send doubles to help when Randall's cooking in the post. And then you get a lot of more situations where Mikal can be that secondary playmaker when defenses collapse on the other side of the floor. You can attack closeouts. You can run a little two-man game with hopefully you keep Hartenstein. But I mean that the possibilities are endless in terms of how he can thrive as a secondary playmaker, especially when I think we saw him do a little bit too much over the last season and a half, and we've seen kind of the peak of his efficiency as in a Suns uniform, and seeing him back in that role. But now that he's fully realized his potential to take over when he needs to, like they'll have moments where they'll need him for that.
Mhm.
Brunson's having a stretch. I mean, man, you think about this, man. Like Brunson's not doing well. Okay, he's still gonna have his gravity. Then you have a chance to see what's Randall's doing. Then you have a chance. Okay, is Mikal got it going? OG's still there to space floor and do his thing. And then you got Dante coming off the bench, still dropping threes. Josh Hart still running the break. He's just a one man machine himself. And there are so many weapons that this team has that maybe this wasn't the superstar trade that maybe people were vying for last year or the last few years that you'd expect to get for 4 picks. But this is by far like one of the smarter all-in trades that we've seen over the past 5 years. That this was not a desperation move. This is a bona fide jump, and let's get into this now. Like this is a jump for me from them being a spunky, fun, competitive playoff team that's going to make other teams sweat and have some great moments, but probably not really hope to win a championship. They've jumped from that kind of conversation to this is a legitimate title contender for me. I feel pretty strongly about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm expecting a big year, and like this will be the real test now to see if Tom Thibodeau has changed his tune now, because he's gonna have a legit 7, 8, 9 man roster now. So I
Yeah.
don't think anyone should have to be playing any too many insane minutes.
Yeah.
They probably still will, but there's definitely the chance there that we're going to see a lot more players playing like 25 minutes instead of 30 minutes, especially during the regular season. They You can make the argument that they are now the biggest challengers to Boston. I think
Yep.
that's a very fair argument that you can make, especially what we saw last year and the injury struggles and the question marks still surrounding the Bucks. The 76ers are under a lot of pressure this offseason to get some deals done, because in reality, they've got Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, and the rest of their roster. I don't think anyone else that played major minutes last year is actually technically coming back. They're either a free agent or they're not being brought back like a Tobias Harris, something like that. So like the 76ers are under a lot of pressure to make a lot of good decisions this year. They have to be smart with where they go with their cap space, but they also have to get the small decisions right in the little role players, the likes of the Nick Batums and those sort of level players. They have to get that those type of players right that they bring in for next year. So in terms of like the continuity that we have and the addition of a guy that has played with the majority of the Knicks roster already, they know his game. They'll be able to make the transition fluid, hopefully. So I mean, I don't see why anyone would knock at the Knicks for being the ultimate contender for the Celtics next year, as long as they are healthy throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, and switching to the defensive side now that we talk about the Celtics, is I think this is the um, biggest argument for them being seriously competitive to be in the finals next year. The defense that you get from Mikal Bridges, guy who's a runner-up defensive player of the year just a couple years ago, bona fide all world, all NBA defense. and then you combine that with OG, you have the two perfect wings to match up with Tatum and Brown, where they're not going to create any mismatches.
Mhm.
They're not going to create any mismatches there. And then you bring on you already see the defense that you get from the rest of the squad and the way that they are able to cover up for Brunson at times. If you just kind of overlap the series that we saw between the Mavs and the Celtics, where you have kind of a heliocentric player in Doncic, somewhat similar to Brunson, what they do, and then you look at the defense and the offense around him, like you can't cheat off of Mikal, you can't cheat off of OG, and then when you go back on the other side of the floor, you can't expose them. There's not going to be any exposing to be had on the wings, and a lot of Celtics offense is developed through those two guys creating advantages, and we'll see obviously like next year. Hopefully, I think this is going to be the most exciting matchup throughout the regular season, and maybe we'll see in the playoffs. But how these two teams match up, it feels like that's the play. It's we have two wings that can match up with the best wing duo in the league who just won a championship, and we're gonna rock with that. You guys aren't going to find any advantages on this team, so it'll just be a grungy hero ball game between Brunson and maybe even like matching some of their play style of like an egalitarian offense because now you have four guys arguably on the Knicks starting five that can create their own shot, that can find their own ways to score. And obviously they're going to defer to Brunson, but it's going to be a fascinating change of pace to see how Thibodeau runs this offense now that he has another weapon to work with in a way that's really going to rival the Celtics, I think.
Yeah, and it seems like this is like the plan for the Knicks. It started with OG, and now they've gone and got Mikal. They're gonna they looked at that Boston Celtics roster and said, okay, this is the level we have to get to. This is the team that we have to stop if we're gonna have success in this era. And they're now trying to build out the roster in the best way they can to try and limit this Boston team, to try and stop this Boston team. Now the next stage for the Knicks is it seems like it's unlikely they'll be able to get Hartenstein back just because they won't be able to pay him the money some other teams will. There's still talk of rumors of a trade for Robinson, and it feels like there's still a domino to fall here. It feels like the only player we're gonna lose in this is Bojan Bogdanovic. I feel like that just it seems like it can't work. There feels like there's gonna have to be another guy that goes, whether that be directly to the Nets or a third team becomes involved. I think there's certain ways that this has to go that I think they're going to have to package another player in another deal to confirm this trade. But
I mean, it's been
yeah,
agreed to in principle. Why would they need to add anybody else?
I think just in terms of like there's little things like the hard cap at the first apron and little different things like that.
I think,
I
but
don't
I
understand too much of it,
that's
but I
been
see a lot of
discussed.
people
But I
talking
think
about
they're
it.
fine because Mikhail's contract is 23 mil
Hmm.
a year, and I think Bojan's is a little under that. So I think money wise they're covered, which is insane because you compare that to the Paul George conversation, where people are thinking about what that trade might look like if they acquired Paul George, and that's when they are really hitting the first apron, and they're not able to work with mid level exceptions, and believe that that's when they're also hitting penalties of like what kind of like picks you can trade and stuff like that. But I think they still have the flexibility of a team operating under the apron, and they're not hitting the hard cap, which is another part of this trade that's insane. Is that they
Hmm.
still have flexibility.
Yeah.
They could if Hartenstein wants to stay in a mid level, they can do it.
Yeah.
That's the crazy part, and we'll see if he gets more than that. But I think that if I mean if I'm Hartenstein, I mean I'm saying the love that you got from New York, the feeling of playing in New York, the role that he got. Like once Thibodeau really opened things up for him, like dude was shining in the
Hmm.
playoffs. I mean that's an opportunity that he hasn't fully had yet in his career, and he got to have it in New York when we weren't sure if he was, and he's become a big part of that. Like why wouldn't he sign for mid level as opposed to um, I mean, it'll be tough to imagine him leaving because he's been such an important part of this team. And then that's a whole other conversation of filling out the front court. But at the end of the day, they still have flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, I hope he stays. I hope they're able to work it. But obviously, like you say, like you understand if he got offered like 20 million a year somewhere else. I
Oh, that
think
would be.
I don't think it'd be the most insane thing in the world, but if he gets that offer, it's obviously it's very tough. It's very tough to turn down. But hopefully, we get both him and Robinson back, and then like this is like our team. Like we have those two guys back. We have a legit 9, 10 guy roster there, and like that's huge for this team. So there might still be deals to be made. There might still be changes that have to make. So, but at the moment, as Stephen A. Smith would say, orange and blue skies, baby. This is a great time to be a New York Knicks fan.
It's unbelievable, really unbelievable. And I think the fun part of this is you get four guys on this squad who are very close, and just the vibes have already been immaculate.
What a story
Uh,
if they win a title together. Imagine winning two
seriously,
titles in college and then
seriously,
all winning the title on the same team in the
seriously.
NBA. Like that's like a movie.
Yeah, we need to get Ryan Arcidiacono back on this team. Someone dig up Amari Spellman. He's probably somewhere out in like Germany playing. Someone check on that guy. Um, but just unbelievable. Like, can we get Jenkins in here too? Um, so one question I have about this team is Randall,
hmm
because I think he's the big X factor here. If Randall can be himself and efficient and successful here, I think that's the X factor of them winning a championship.
Yeah, that's fair.
And how do you feel? Like, what's your general feeling on that? Is this going to work out with him accepting that role and succeeding in that role?
Yeah, I think it will because I think obviously he still had pretty high uses last year, but in reality, as we saw once he went down, and even as we were seeing throughout last season, like it was Jalen Brunson was dominant even when Randall was there. He was obviously the no doubt number two while he was playing there, and maybe next year won't be the same. But Randall strikes me as a guy who wants to win and wants to be successful. So I would picture him as the type of player that be willing to accept a role as maybe like sharing some of his usage, some of his shots with a Mikal Bridges or something like that. Because obviously that's the real addition. Like he played with OG, he played with other guys
Yeah.
last year as well. So I think that's a role that he'd be willing to accept. I think he loves it in New York. I think he'll want to stay there. It's always a question mark that definitely rises when you're going from being the guy to just being one of the guys. That's obviously it's tough. It can take a toll on certain guys mentally, but I believe Randall will be willing to take that smaller role in an effort to win in New York. I truly believe that, and if it doesn't happen, I think there's deals that could be made. I think he could prove a pretty valuable trade asset if it wasn't to happen. But I hope he stays. I hope they keep running with the squad that they've got. Like I said, I wanted them to just run it back. I was more than happy if the Knicks just ran it back with the exact same team next year. And now they've added a guy like Mikal, and I think Randall can still flourish even with Mikal being added to the squad.
Yeah, and I think the lineups here are going to be the interesting discussion. They'll be fun to think about what kind of lineups they get throw out there to maintain the spacing and maybe even have. I mean, think about Randall out there. If he can work on mismatches in the post, and you have Mikhail spacing for him, like they can complement each other there. OG spacing for him, and maybe that's an interesting way where you can toggle between Brunson and Randall, and honestly keep Randall at kind of a focal point of the offense,
Yeah,
especially when he has it going. And it doesn't have to be a huge sacrifice if they're able to work those lineups, and that really is a Tibbs conversation. Is Tibbs going to go that route, or is he's so sometimes the lineups are not as conventional as you want it to be because a lot of it has to do just having his best defenders out there and his best players and having them figure things out, as opposed to I think taking advantage of some opportunities with, I mean, Randall attacking second units, and maybe he doesn't have to be on the court with him at the same time, and that's when this team can sustain a really strong regular season success if they can all stay fresh like that and not play crazy minutes and be able to play off of each other in a way. And I mean that's gonna be the recipe, man. If they can stay healthy
yeah,
up to the postseason, like they have probably the deepest roster in the Eastern Conference to contend.
Yeah, and like having Randall back makes such a difference because that allows Brunson to rest more. You can run the offense through Randall, especially when you're going up against second units during the regular season. You have no problem putting the ball in Randall's hand and letting him take over, and that's something we didn't have in the postseason. There was no one you really wanted to rely on to do it outside of Jalen Brunson. That ultimately began to catch up with him and began to catch up with the team. So I think Randall's still going to have opportunities to be that guy, and I think the rotations we see, the splits we see between him and Brunson could be very interesting, and that could be kind of the difference between whether we're a top two, top three seed again, or whether we're in the 5 or 6 seed next year.
Yeah. And I started having this conversation in my head and talking about like we're already talking about seeding next year after this trade, but where this puts them in tiers. I mean, I believe alongside you that this turns them into a more legit contender, maybe like not a like a bona fide contender, maybe like a 1B contender. Um and I think about the Bucks, 76ers, I'm pretty confident they're in a tier below. Um but this is a conversation going into the offseason. I think we're going to very quickly regret some of the takes that are thrown around here about the Knicks in lieu of Giannis being injured and what we didn't get to see from them. And
Hmm.
I think the Bucks have a lot to prove next season, and especially now with the Knicks really arming up. Um, I think before we wrap up here, we should probably quickly address the Nets situation, and they're a team who's done the best job possible for a team that went all in on this three-headed monster with Harden, KD, and Irving, and then have it all crumble down, try to reset with the Ben Simmons. That did not work. And then look at them now. They have 16 first-round picks up through 2031. They have 4 first-round picks in the highly touted 2025 draft.
Hmm.
In principle, if this trade works out, they're going to have their immediate future come back. They're going to have their picks from the Rockets. So that swap coming in, I think you're saying is going to be starting next year. Those swaps will be returned to them. They're going to be able to have their own picks. Houston now has Phoenix's picks, so that they can try and deal away for Durant, which is a whole other conversation. It'd be insane. Um, but how do you feel now about the Nets? Their new direction. They still have guys to trade, a lot more moves to make. They really doing a great job here.
Commit to the connection. Commit to that direction. Commit
Yeah.
to this. They did it once, and then they changed. They tried to speed up the process as quickly as they possibly could,
Yeah.
and it blew up in their face. And they did that when they first moved to Brooklyn as well. Do it right. Do it honestly here. They're probably still going to resign Nick Claxton. They're still going to have Cam Thomas. They're still going to have some really decent players on this roster. And now they're in a position where they got a lot of draft picks. They're going to be probably in a good position, as much as there's still a lot of bad teams in the Eastern Conference. So I wouldn't be overly confident that they're going to be getting the number one pick, or even the top three pick next year, because there is still a lot of bad teams in the East, and even out West as well. But they're still going to have talent on this roster, even when they're going to trade certain guys, probably like you think Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Johnson, a couple of the older guys. They'll probably get some draft capital back for those guys. And I think they could definitely milk a team to get a good deal for Cam
Yeah.
Johnson. Like I said to you,
Yes.
like you mentioned it, like imagine holding on to him to the deadline. A lot of teams will
Yes.
get
Yeah.
desperate then. If I'm if I was the Los Angeles Lakers, I'd test the waters today and say
Mm,
we'll give you our 20 our pick, our number 17 pick, and like Rui Hachimura for Cam Johnson. I would try and test the waters straight off the bat, and see what they could
mm.
do, because I think Cam Johnson will be a great fit in LA in terms of the shooting ability, the defense, the length. I think he'd be an upgrade on Rui Hachimura, and I think he'd fit in well in that Lakers team. But there's
I
also
think even
teams,
Dorian Finney-Smith. I mean, I
yeah.
for Cam Johnson, like I'm letting him rock this season. It's like really pump up those numbers.
Hmm.
And Dorian Finney-Smith is kind of more of a known commodity. I think Cam Johnson, maybe some teams can think about him taking another step forward. Um, I mean, Dorian Finney-Smith, I think, is an upgrade over Rui Hachimura defensively and as a floor spacer, more reliable, um, better switchable defender. I mean, there's a lot of arguments why a lot of teams like the Lakers would do that. I mean, for a first round pick in this draft, I mean, absolutely. I mean, what are the Lakers going to do with that? We know they're not very well known to draft well in that little range there. But man, the Nets are still loaded with talent. I think Claxton, you do have to keep him. You do have to keep that talent around before you trade him. But he's also a guy that, you know, top 5 in block rate,
Yeah.
one of the best rim runners in the game. Incredibly young for his success already.
OKC could be a great fit for him.
Yeah, I mean the list would go on. I mean, how many
Mhm.
teams would really benefit from a rim running, shot blocking, elite shot blocking talent like him, who can switch a little bit. There's a lot of things Nick Claxton can do. I mean, the bottom line for the Nets right now is they are just getting started and they have their future back. They have added assets on top of that, and they still have a little ways to go. So while some NBA fans are a little averse to the whole uh, tank situation, I personally get pretty excited with the management of like these assets because they've really put themselves in a position to rebuild in a really meaningful long term way.
Yeah, and especially like this year. If this year is the bad year and they're going into a 2025 class that has been highly, highly touted as one of the best
Hmm.
classes in the last decade, and they end up there with a top 5 pick, they could find their franchise piece there, and then they can start to look at using their other draft assets to build around that franchise piece. Like it doesn't have to be 3, 4, 5 years like it has
Yeah,
been for some teams. That they could find a way to make this a very quick turnaround. Not to say they do it like they did with KD and Irving and all that, but they could find their star piece in next year's draft and then start to look at using their assets to build around that star piece.
yeah, and I like what a lot of teams we've seen this in recent memory, like the complete tankathon that some teams like the 76ers had, OKC had, that the Pels have had. That you compare that to some of the more quicker turnarounds we've seen around the league, and I think the Nets could set themselves up for that. I mean, if they lucked themselves into a bona fide future star in next year's draft, then you keep your guys like Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Nick Claxton. You keep good role
Yeah.
players around a burgeoning star in the same way that the Spurs have found themselves with some solid role players around Wemby, and they're not incredibly far off. They've got some holes to well, there's it's not a net nothing. It's not
Yeah, that's
like
fair. That's fair.
Anthony Davis walking into a locker room full of nothing,
Hmm.
right? It's not like Boogie Cousins walking into a locker room full of nothing. Sorry,
That's
Terry
fair.
Cousins. But they could set themselves up if they walk into a really good pick next year of having a good locker room around that guy. Um, so there's different ways to go about it. They're in a
Yeah,
good
so
spot.
it's just obviously it's tough because the Nets are in a somewhat similar position to the Knicks. You kind of always feel like they're going to mess it up, so you kind of
Yeah.
you're kind of on pins and needles while you're watching all of this go down. But they're doing it. Everything's going right at the moment. They're definitely doing it well. So keep on that track. Hopefully they'll be in a position to have a top 5 pick in next year's draft, and maybe that's when they find that star. But in terms of going into the rebuild, right time for Brooklyn to do it. They've started off very well in terms of recouping some assets. I think there's still going to be a few dominoes left to fall and more assets for them to claim possibly this offseason, if not this offseason, probably by the next trade deadline. But on the Houston side of things, getting those picks, trying to really just real quick, trying to get a deal to maybe get Kevin Durant or Devin Booker.
They're not getting
Ambitious,
Book. They're not getting Book.
ambitious for Houston, no doubt. But yeah, I think if the rumor was they want to try and get Devin Booker, I'd be like, yeah, I mean that's a good person for you to target. I'm not sure you're going to get him, but the fact that they're being linked with KD, like, and especially talk of it next year, like, come on, KD is going to be what 36 then, and you're going to add him to that Rockets lineup. Like, do you really expect to be that close and KD to be that final piece? That just seems like a they feel like they're watching KD from 3 4 years ago at the moment. I think in Houston, I think that'd be an error if that was a guy that they targeted with what the assets that they have.
Fair. I mean, it's funny because time and time again, KD's changed teams and things have not worked out, and that's just maybe oversimplifying the situations that he was in. But I think for a team like the Rockets that we've seen make massive improvements was a really fun team to watch compete last season, and obviously was just a year away or so. But things change quickly. Like the development of their young stars could come quicker than we expect, and adding in a scorer like Kevin Durant, a two-way player. I mean, Kevin Durant is still a guy who's going to contribute defensively. Like that, you don't turn that down. And I think as the arms race has continued in both the Eastern and Western Conference, especially in the West, I think Houston still views themselves as a team that is showing that they can make it there. I mean, I don't.
Mhm.
I think that they look at the Kings, they look at the Pelicans, they look at those teams, and they're not worried about that. They look at the Lakers and the Clippers, they're not going to be worried about that. I think they would see themselves in a great position to be a top five team in the West without Kevin Durant. And if adding him in, I think they would probably make the argument to themselves that that puts them in top three in the West and really make a run for the finals. I don't see that out as a picture if you talk yourselves into it. If you're a Rockets fan, I don't know Rockets management. I think Rockets management would feel the same way if they're already pining for that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's tough to turn down a guy like Kevin Durant. I just like, yeah, I
You don't
guess
need
we'll
more
see.
picks. You don't
See
need more
what,
picks.
yeah, sure. See what Houston does this year, and see if they're really in that position where they add a guy like KD, and then you really kind of believe that they're in that position, that they're just that one piece away. So yeah, maybe it's a wait and see on what Houston offers this year, because I think that they're talking of possibly doing this next year, or maybe even at the trade deadline, depending on how things go with Phoenix. Go with Phoenix this year, but I think that we will wrap it up. The
Yes,
first
sir.
domino of the
The
NBA
biggest
offseason
domino.
has fallen. Mikal Bridges, welcome to the New York Knicks. The Villanova Knicks are now complete. Happy times. Let's go, Knicks.
Yes, sir.